Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Mess. So, taking a fun and exciting video for you guys today because we're taking a look at some MAME emulation updates. Now just be aware, in a previous video I told you guys that MAME announced they're going not by a month-to-month release schedule now, but probably a bi-monthly release. But the interesting thing is on the GitHub repo, all of the different builds for commits that are going to be pushed into a new version of MAME are available to download. And just recently a developer going by the name of Hap with like 5P, so I'm not going to say Hap the entire time, has updated some Namco System 21 emulation, and that is absolutely amazing because it's a fun platform and a lot of the games didn't work perfectly before. I will give you right now though a flashing light warning for the next 20 seconds. Soulfulu absolutely just goes crazy on the screen when you get hit. So I'm actually limiting the footage of that in this actual video just because it's one of those things that absolutely drives me nuts, almost like the klaxon sound when you have a low health warning in some of these games. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe, and hitting that notification bell definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, got a Patreon link down below as well. But Namco System 21, more famously known as the Polygonizer, is absolutely a fun board, and I remember some of these arcade cabinets still being at arcades when I started playing games. It's one of those things though, these basically all came out either right around the time I was born, or I was slightly too young and then they left the arcade floors. And just so you know, that flashing light warning is now gone because Soulfulu is not going to be in the video anymore. And moving over to Cybersled, this is another game that's going to be promoted to basically working that is absolutely a ton of fun. There's just something about the aesthetic of the Namco System 21 that absolutely hits. Basically, it was the competitor hardware to something like the Sega Model 1 or Konami's own Polygon-based boards, although those never really went very far, only getting PolyNet Warriors and PolygonNet Commander. And if those don't sound familiar, I do have a video of one of them on my playlist because I do have an original arcade board for some. But honestly, these games are absolutely a vibe, and I love that Namco went for these really kind of almost neon but yet still pastel colorways in their games back in the day. Namco games always had a very specific look to them, and when Sega went for those bright blue skies and everything else, Namco would basically play around in a completely different color palette. If you're wondering, yes, I didn't have the controls perfectly set up here. I was going to dig my twin sticks out for Cybersled, but then I realized I only needed a couple minutes worth of actual footage, so it didn't really seem worth doing. Because again, this is just a preview. If you want to go over to the GitHub and look at the commit builds, the clangs, you can get them over there, but it's one of those things, maybe best to wait until the next version of MAME comes out, because if you're the type of person that's going to test different MAME commits, you probably already know that they exist and I don't really need to tell you about them. But honestly, these boards are really the boards that need more improvements in MAME. Some of the bespoke 3D stuff from the 80s to the 90s, because obviously some of them already work very well, but there's still some improvements to be made on Namco System 21. It's great to see those things coming in, because you're basically not going to see cabinets for these games any longer out in the world. They are incredibly rare, and I don't want to call them extinct, but they're getting very close to it at this point in time. So emulation definitely is video game preservation in this instance, and I'd love to say this is why retro gaming is making a comeback. People are going to be discovering these games now that they're going to emulate better in MAME. Because one of those things, Soulfulu would crash like 45 seconds in the last version of MAME, and basically every version before it, but now it's going to be working perfectly fine. Once you solve the NVRAM issue, which took me about 45 minutes to figure out before I was able to get into the game. But I'm sure that will be much buttoned up by the time MAME 288 is out. And it is a little bit of a bummer that MAME is going to a bi-monthly schedule, but I totally understand that they have done so much that really they can take their time with the next build, because it's one of those things, people are always expecting every build of MAME to do something amazing and spectacular, and in those months where not a lot of progress is made, or progress is still in progress for lack of a better term, it makes sense for them to wait until they have another fundamentally big build out there. But honestly, Cybersled is absolutely a vibe, and if you take the time to get the twin stick set up, which I did not here because we're just talking about it working better, not about the controls, then you're going to have a great time with this one. And it is one of those things, I love the vibes of these untextured polygons. You leave me a comment down below and you tell me how you feel about them. Now moving over into air combat, this is another game that's going to be working so much better on this current build, and in my opinion it is the best game on the Namco System 21, because we're going to go into some of the racing games in just a moment, and I would say Namco hadn't really figured out arcade racing quite yet. Ridge Racer really is where they figured out the entirety of how to make a great arcade racing game. Also going to be our first soundtrack sample though, because music has improved in Namco System 21 emulation, and I'll be right back with a lot more games to talk about.
Falcon 1, ready to take off.
Cleared for takeoff.
Take off.
Contact 2 bogies just over us. Doing 400 knots to the north.
Falcon 1, I clear. Tally ho. Left 11 o'clock. I'm going for it.
Sounds really good to me, and as far as why those voice samples are muffled, I would assume that it's what the original game is doing, as a fighter pilot would have headphones on and it would be slightly loud up there. But I have never actually seen a cabinet for this in my life. I have seen Cyber Sleds once, but that's the only cabinet I've ever seen for any Namco System 21 game, unless I completely missed it back in the day, walked by, and just don't have the memory. And that really is why this emulation is important, because again, if you know where any of the games are that are on this playlist or this video, definitely tell me, because if I'm ever there, I'll definitely stop in and take a look at one. I would love to see one, but it's just one of those things. This hardware definitely got obsoleted pretty quickly when Namco went to System 22 and Sega had Model 2 on arcade floors. So a lot of these cabinets were quite big and expensive, and when they weren't getting revenue in the form of quarters, it's one of those things they just went to the recycling bin or into private collections. So unfortunately, it is a reality that emulation keeps them alive, because finding real hardware, even the PCBs, can be incredibly difficult to actually locate, and that is why emulation really is video game preservation in its purest form. If it wasn't for MAME and developers working on these things, these games would basically be unplayable by basically everyone. And again, I just love the vibe of the Namco System 21, and I will say something even though everyone that watches this channel knows I'm a huge Sega fan. I like the look of the Namco System 21 slightly more than I like the look of Sega Model 1. Once you get to Namco System 22 and Model 2, that definitely switches back, but the colors that Namco developers and artists use here and the overall polygon count just have a very fun vibe going to them. And if you saw these games in the late 80s or early 90s, it would be blowing you away, because at home basically everyone was still playing the NES, maybe getting into Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis territory. And obviously now this is definitely something that home consoles couldn't do back in the day, and that is why arcades were always so popular in that era. They basically just showed what hardware and technology you might be playing in 5 to 6 years when you actually got it home. Let's move over to Winning Run, another Namco System 21 game, and obviously now we've gotten to the racing genre. And while this isn't a bad time in any way, shape, or form, it's one of those things. It definitely is not going to stand toe-to-toe with virtual racing in my opinion. And like I said earlier, once Namco gets to Ridge Racer, they absolutely unlock the ability to make an incredible arcade racing game. And that's not to say Winning Run isn't fun, it just isn't living up to the same standard as Sega. But honestly, if I'm being completely actually upfront with you, nobody beats Sega when it comes to arcade racing games in my opinion. But you guys can totally debate that in the comments. But again, as far as the emulation goes here, it is definitely working better, it's sounding better, and that is a win for everyone. But the next game I'm going to talk about, I want to preface because I'm going to be using PlayStation 1 footage. That is because Galaxian 3 emulation is in development and showing some signs of life on actual MAME emulation, but it still isn't complete, but it'll definitely be exciting when that happens. And that is because Galaxian 3 was a gigantic movie theater-sized arcade cabinet where you had 6 different projection screens all running on Laserdisc, and they would use the Namco System 21 hardware to put polygons that you would shoot on top of it. And even though it isn't complete, it is in progress, and that is going to be absolutely outstanding. And there is one cabinet still working in the US, in New Hampshire. I believe Phil Bennett and a few other people went in and actually made it operational again. And because I grew up in Vermont, as did my wife, next time we fly into Boston and drive up to Vermont to see some family, I'm going to try to bring my camera and try to get permission from that arcade to do a little bit of a background on the machine, get some gameplay, and otherwise document it with my cinema cameras, because it's something that you're never going to see basically anywhere else. And hopefully soon you'll be able to play Galaxian 3 in MAME, because it's one of those things that's in progress by one of the same people that worked on Namco's Ridge Racer 3 screen, so that will definitely be exciting. But honestly, even though MAME is going to a bi-monthly schedule at this point in time, there are still a lot of improvements in the pipeline, and again, if you go over to GitHub and some of the commits, you can go ahead and download these versions of MAME and test them for yourself. Do I recommend everybody do that? I do not. It's one of those things, for everything that works, something will probably be broken until it's actually released as a main distribution release. And if all you want to do is sit down and play some fun arcade games and not think about how to get them running, then those commit builds are probably not for you. Namco System 21 is a super fun piece of hardware, and seeing more improvements to its emulation is definitely something that I'm excited about. You leave me a comment down below and you tell me your favorite Namco System 21 game. After that, we're done. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, but I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.